So hello everyone, welcome to New Hampshire Housing's presentation of From the Outskirts to Downtown, Taxes, Land Use, and Value Analysis in 3 Southern Tier Communities. I'm Sarah Reitzman. I'm the Executive Director of the Workforce Housing Coalition of the Greater Seacoast and the Housing Coordinator for the Regional Economic Development Center. This event is presented by New Hampshire Housing, which is a self-sustaining corporation created under New Hampshire statute with a mission to promote, finance, and support affordable housing and related services for the people of our state. Part of what housing professionals do is think creatively about policy alternatives that will help to promote housing development and housing affordability, also recognizing that while everyone needs a place to live, the creation of new homes is an essential part of the Granite State's economic development future. We recognize that Urban 3's approach could have great utility in many communities throughout New Hampshire as communities wrestle with questions of how to promote what forms of land use through their zoning ordinances to achieve best outcomes. The Urban 3 study analyzed 15 communities across the Granite State, large and small, from the Seacoast to the North Country. Joe Minicozzi of Urban 3 will present the results of his work in the southern New Hampshire communities of Nashua, Pelham, and Hudson today. This presentation is being recorded, and we'll share links to the video and the presentation with registrants tomorrow. So Joe's presentation will last about an hour. We'll have plenty of time for Q&A after that, so please enter your questions in the chat box and we'll get to as many of them as we can. Before I introduce Joe, I wanted to take a minute to thank our sponsors. That's Craig Deachman and Associates, RBC, and TD Bank. We're very grateful for their support. I'd also like to take a moment to tell you a little bit about the organizations that are hosting tonight, starting with mine, the Workforce Housing Coalition of the Greater Seacoast. We are a nonprofit that works across the Greater Seacoast region of New Hampshire to educate and engage communities and municipalities to advance diverse housing options. We do this by providing technical assistance and education, community engagement, and sort of local coalition building and messaging work. Our vision is that members of the workforce can put down roots, creating a more diverse and equitable community that benefits all of us. Learn more about the Workforce Housing Coalition and join our mailing list online at seacoastwhc.org. I'd also like to thank our co-hosts that help promote this event, starting with the Regional Economic Development Center, REDC. It's a private nonprofit organization that offers technical assistance, alternate financing, and business development training. REDC seeks to promote responsible, sustainable development activities in Rockingham and Hillsborough County. We do this by creating jobs for low to moderate income people. Housing affordability has long been part of REDC's economic development strategy for the region. So that's why in 2018, REDC formed a strategic partnership with the Workforce Housing Coalition and last year added a housing coordinator, that's me, to the team. So you can learn more about REDC at redc.com and their housing program at redc.com/housing. And finally, I want to thank the Nashua Regional Planning Commission. The RPC, established in 1959, the RP is the oldest of New Hampshire's 9 regional planning commissions. In addition to the city of Nashua, NRPC proudly serves the towns of Amherst, Brookline, Hollis, Hudson, Litchfield, Lindenborough, Mason, Merrimack, Milford, Mount Vernon, Pelham, and Wilton. The NRPC focuses on developing and implementing innovative planning strategies that preserve and improve the quality of life in southern New Hampshire through coordinated land use, environmental, and transportation planning, while providing a forum for sharing information and ideas and serving as an advocate for the region, the state, and federal levels. You can learn more about the Nashua RPC at nashuarpc.org. And of course, a big thank you to the 15 communities who are part of Urban 3's analysis, especially the ones we'll be talking about tonight, the 3 southern New Hampshire communities, Hudson, Nashua, and Pelham. And now to our speaker. Joe Minicozzi is the principal of Urban 3. Prior to creating Urban 3, he served as the executive director for the Asheville Downtown Association. Joe is an urban planner, imagining new ways to think about and visualize land use, urban design, and economics. Joe founded Urban 3 to explain and visualize market dynamics created by tax and land use policies. Joe holds a Bachelor of Architecture at the University of Miami and Master of Architecture and Urban Design from Harvard University. In 2017, he was recognized as one of the 100 most influential urbanists of all time. Joe, welcome virtually to Southern New Hampshire.
Thanks, Sarah, and thanks for having me tonight. So you can see my screen still and see me, and the sound works. We're good?
Yes.
Great. Well, thank you. So I'll go ahead and get started. We have about an hour's worth of information here, so I'm just going to blaze through some stuff. One of the things that I've put forward in every presentation is and this is very true for this study because of the comprehensive nature of it, and that you can actually see this in the communities in New Hampshire. But cities and towns and villages all have a form of a DNA that we set up through our transportation system. So it's kind of like your gene structure, kind of the way that I have a gene structure. Like, this is how I started my life when I was 3 months old, and this is my path to be my grandfather, whether I like it or not. There's not a lot I can change in my genetic makeup based off of how I was created. So it's scalable. Eventually that baby will become the grandfather, or more importantly, again, when I had hair, I'm on my trajectory to be my father first. So we know this about ourselves. We know this about our families. We see this in our relatives. Well, the same is true of place. The same is true of your community. There are communities throughout the state that have your genetic makeup. They have some of the good stuff. They also have some of the bad stuff. It's fair to say that Peterborough is a scalable version of what could be Portsmouth if things changed. If we're on the ocean, that would be helpful. But it's also different things and choices in how communities grow that have the genetic material. So if there's anything that you can take away from my presentation at the end, is just think about who's your grandfather or grandmother. Who do you want to be when you grow up? Who's your cousin? Who's had good things and who's had bad things? Learn from the bad as well. Learn from the heart attacks, because you can apply that in your community. Before I go into New Hampshire, let's just do a quick little drive through Asheville, North Carolina, where I live. Asheville is one of the top tourist destinations in the entire country. We're really feeling it right now with COVID and the economic pain of that. But Asheville wasn't always great. These are shots of Asheville from the 80s, all these boarded up buildings in the 1990s. Asheville was actually the second largest city in North Carolina by the time the Depression hit. And then we just fell flat on our face for 50 years. And anytime somebody tried to fix downtown or do some urban buildings or do anything with downtown housing, it was met by a group of people with biases. And this is oftentimes in our leadership, where they would say, that won't work here. We're rural people. We're not Boston. Get that out of here. We're not Portland, Maine, or Portland, Oregon, for that matter. And rather than seeing what cities are and towns and villages as a human habitat, we had biases just assuming that this just didn't work anymore. I worked for this gentleman here in the upper left. His name is Julian Price, who started a for-profit real estate development company. And Pat Whalen was the director, the president of the company. And we put 75% of that 15 million into buildings and reserved 25% for seeding businesses. So it's about doing that ground story, economic activity, finding an entrepreneur that has a cool idea, like the first vegetarian restaurant, the Laughing Seed. We didn't run the restaurant, but we helped them get in business. But it's about making it active downtown. So this is one of our buildings before and after. These are 400 to 500 square foot apartments, and it's not something that I might choose for my current lifestyle, but there's a point in time in which that was fine for me. So this is 28 units. Surely there's 28 people that would live in a small footprint. And this has been 99% leased up ever since, because a lot of people like the location, the architecture, and they don't have a lot of needs. So this is an opportunity of a diversity of housing in our community. And it's really simple. If you think of your community as a diverse set of data, basically, of people, you'll be thinking of it differently. And we often found ourselves constantly bringing data and information into our community conversation, rather than just talk about our emotions and how we feel about things. It was how does it work financially? So this is our downtown, where our downtown was worth $100 million in 1990 as a portfolio. We're a $15 million investor in this. We didn't get a new building in downtown until 2008. So this is what happened just by fixing up what was already just sitting around. It just didn't have anything going on in the upper stories. So we basically had $500 million sitting around as a community. We just didn't know it. So I have to credit the city for actually stepping out first in the 1980s. They did a series of streetscape projects. They invested in the public realm, basically working on the bones, if you will, to get the body healthy, and doing what was necessary. So in an urban environment, you need a higher level of service on sidewalks, and you need to concentrate on parking. So they actually built some parking garages and they invested in sidewalks. These are actual campaign ads from the 1990s from Chris Peterson, and Chris hated the investment. He thought, he's very conservative. He thought it was a huge boondoggle and a waste of taxpayer investment. $26 million. There he is complaining. I love this taxpayer just crying with this shackle here. $26 million of investment. Okay, let's do some math here. If you invest $26 million on a $100 million asset, and it basically grows fourfold to 500 million. So it's investing 26 and yielding a $430 million investment. Is that a good return on investment? And when I present this in Asheville, everybody's like, yeah, that makes sense. But yet, it was controversial to do that because we didn't think it through from a data perspective. And you're not going to stop Chris. Chris has a website now with fire and brimstone. He misspelled charlatans. This is the mayor. I asked the mayor, I said, I like how the lightning bolt's hitting her. I was like, is that a liquor drink? She goes, it should be. It's just, Chris is entitled to his opinion. He's not entitled to the facts that run the community. And what our city is, if we're a real estate developer, the city's just a really big version of that. And we have a finite boundary of land. Our state has actually made it illegal for us to annex land. So the land that we have is the land that we have. This is very true in New England, where you have towns that border each other. It's not like Nashua is gonna annex Pelham. It's just not, that's not gonna happen, but you're related and you're side by side. So as a boundary, that land is all that you have that you run as a corporation. So cities are incorporated. If you look up the word incorporate in the Oxford American Dictionary, it says to constitute a company, a city, or other organization as a legal corporation. So by law, you're just a really big real estate development company. And so is your county, Hillsborough County, and so is your state of New Hampshire. It's incorporated. So is our country. If you look up the word, Joe Biden said this on the Stephen Colbert show in 2016. The United States is the largest corporation in the world. And I'm such a nerd at midnight, I looked it up. There's the US code on the bottom of the slide if you want to look it up. So we're supposed to run our government to have the principles of the corporate responsibility. What's the cost and the revenues of what happens? At the very least, are you making some revenue off that to fold into community investment? And that could be a park, that could be an education program. How do we cultivate the revenue stream to make it work? And we're constantly here in Asheville harassing, well, maybe I do a little bit more than most, our elected officials to say, like, Asheville is 6 times the value of Ted Turner as a portfolio. We're worth $14 billion in taxable value, which is kind of ridiculous. But does Ted Turner just make his decisions off Facebook? Of course not. So I certainly don't expect our councilors to do the same. So the commodity of how cities operate, that land would be worth nothing had it not been for the municipal investment to get a pipe or a road to go out to it. So that land is our product. The land is how we run communities. That's how we run our cities and counties, and where we live and where we work is all connected by infrastructure. So here's one of the buildings that we did. So the city did this infrastructure. Thank you, city, for the garbage can, the bike rack, 2 benches, and a street tree. Chris said that we were subsidized with that, so fine, whatever. Even though the whole world can walk on that, we put in retail, office, and residential above. We took the taxable value from $300,000 to $11 million. So the taxes on that property shot up 3,500%. So let me ask you a question. If you have a 401k plan that grows by 3,500%, wouldn't you like that? So this is how we cultivate community wealth. Go out and buy 3,500% more garbage cans. We don't care. But we as a community should understand where that investment's coming from and how do we cultivate new wealth. And oftentimes what people do is we all fall to biases, and people are just like, well, that's $11 million. We've got this Walmart at 20 million. Okay, if you just look at that number, yeah, it's a bigger number, it's double our building. But it took 34 acres of our corporation to get there. So it's really not a fair way to look at the total value because it's grossly different property sizes. So a way to think about this is do an analysis per acre, and you can see that we produce 100 times more taxes per acre than they do. Now you all stop right here because this is the revenue stream that you run in New Hampshire. We have retail taxes. Down here, people are like, well, Joe, we lose money on the property tax or the retail tax. We're like, really? Okay, let's look at the retail tax. We're double the retail tax per acre. Who would have thought that a furniture store, a beauty salon, and a tattoo shop are actually more productive than a Walmart? They are. Residents, got more residents, they have none. We also have more jobs. So when you break things down apples to apples, when you use land, which is your only commodity to run your community, as your quotient to understand productivity, you'll see where you're getting your wealth and where you're not. And again, it's like, I put this in front of people and they're like, well, you just hate Walmart. You know, it's just, why do we have these biases without staring at the data that's right in front? So since we're talking about it, yeah, I presented at the International Association of Tax Assessing Officers Conference, which is probably one of the squarest conferences I've ever been to, but the people there are super awesome. The assessors are great. They're trying to find value. This guy got up and did the keynote presentation on how cheap Walmarts are. And it was an amazing presentation. I'm in the back of the room going, this is amazing. This guy's efficient. 3,000 assessors in one room, you're getting all of your property tax bills lowered, because if you show the assessors that you're producing no value, that's going to help them understand that you're not worth much. That's cool, but as trained as an architect, somebody who believes in community investment, I was like, why doesn't anybody care? Now, assessors are agnostic. They don't create value. They just want to know what the value is. So I went up to the microphone and I asked Mr. Terrell, I said, what's the useful life of one of your buildings? And he, unapologetically shot back at me, 15, maybe 20 years. We're designing the building to depreciate it as fast as possible. We'll build another building and start the depreciation cycle again. We don't care about the buildings to throw away. Okay, from the mouth of babes, this is your community. Is it worth it for you to have a 15-year investment? Is that going to work for you? And then you're going to have basically a fallow pad sitting there, just an empty lot for another, 10 years? Does that cash flow for you? I like to tell people that, that's the investment cycle of a cat. A cat lasts 15 years and then that's it. We at least mourn the passing of a cat. I'm a dog person. This is a joke. I'm just trying to drive home the point that when you're thinking of your corporation, think about other people's investment in your corporation and what they're getting in return and what your extraction is. What do you lose? And are you running those numbers? And now I want you to realize this isn't complex math that I'm doing here. It's 5th grade division. In fact, we already do it. When we talk about cars, we don't talk about cars on a miles per tank basis, do we? If we did, we'd all be driving Ford F-150s. It's 650 miles per tank. We say, if I were to say that, like, my truck's got the most mileage, you're like, Joe, it's got the biggest tank. We say miles per gallon to rate efficiency in vehicles. And a 1955 BMW Isetta is the most productive vehicle on this page. So if we're doing this for a $3 commodity or a $2 commodity, shouldn't we be doing this for a $20,000 to a $30,000 commodity? And you can't make more land. Your community is what your community is. So we've done this all across the country, taking all of the data sets that we have. I think we have over 120 different cities at this point, mashing it up. This is what you see. For every dollar of county taxes that somebody out in the unincorporated county is paying to the county, their brother in the city or town is paying about 5 times that. Here's the Walmart, there's the mall. This is a 2-story building. That's a 3-story building, and this is a 6-story building. So just putting aside the 6-story building for a second, look at the jump you get going from 1 story to 2 stories just by shape of the building. That's the value you get with your Main Street, basically. So taking this to the next level, that's a form of information. Can we visualize the data that's going on in your community? So I like to think of like visualizing my brain, that this is an MRI of somebody's brain, and you can see the brainstem activity in blue and the creative thought process in green. So can we take this to the next level and apply this to urban planning? Can we do an economic MRI of your place? So this is Hennepin County, the productivity model of Hennepin County, Minnesota, which is home to Minneapolis. Can you tell where downtown Minneapolis is? So this is showing where the productivity is coming from and the scale of that productivity. So let's go through that in a simpler way. This is Asheville, North Carolina. This is my county. It's 350 square miles. It's a big county. But we have a part of the Blue Ridge Parkway that comes through town. This is a federal forest. It's a big, it's non-taxable. So just to be crude about it, that park doesn't pay my county taxes, so it's non-taxable. We gray it out. Green is low value, so this is about $160,000 an acre right there, or $160,000 or less of total value. And purple is high value. So that big purple splotch right there, that's the Biltmore estate. That one house is worth $100 million of taxable value in total. But it's really not a fair way of talking about it because it's an 8,000 acre parcel with a 180,000 square foot house on it. So does anybody have a 180,000 square foot house? No. So this is like miles per tank. Rather than total value, let's do value per acre so we can see productivity. And here's that map. But let me just show it to you in 3D. So you can see what's going on with our downtown and productivity of downtown Asheville. We can also see our little cousin of Black Mountain, which is a little village of about 12,000 people, about 9 miles east of us. And you can see its downtown like Baby Bear, and this is Mama Bear. Now, we don't have a great relationship with some of the folks out in the county. They don't like our downtown. They don't like our city. In fact, people out here in Fairview got our state legislator to call us a cesspool of sin, which is super awesome. Now, in their defense, they think that they're paying a lot of taxes, and they are relative to people around them. But they have no idea what we're paying in county taxes. So rather than hate on us, how about a thank you card? Because we're kicking out a lot of county taxes to them. We pay 12 mills to the county for the 6 mills that we pay to the city. So we're actually paying more county taxes than city taxes. So in this form, you can see what's going on in our community. You can also see what's going on from a downtown standpoint and what's happening with sprawl and how relatively low value you get for a lot of infrastructure. So this is all geospatial analytics. This is about putting information on a map and it's spatially related. This is a joke that I like to use, but I know it only works for people over the age of 35, but I still like it. It's spatial. So for your study in New Hampshire, the first thing that we had to do was understand your tax system. Your tax system is different from ours. So we always go through and do this like taxes for dummies because we're a bunch of dummies from North Carolina. So our system is pretty simple. In North Carolina, we get a market value. Everybody gets the same taxable reduction to a taxable value. You multiply your tax rate and you're done. It's called a straight tax system. It's really simple. Yours is pretty close, but what you have is a lot more exemptions than us. So you have all these exemptions to get your taxable value. Then you multiply your tax rate to get your tax bill, but your tax rate is defined by your budget less your non-property tax revenue divided by your city tax assessment, tax assessed value. So that's basically how it operates. I'll just throw Dover in here just so you have it. But at $600,000 worth of value, the city's tax rate is about 2%, which is kind of high. But that yields about $14,000 in taxes at the city level. Really big drop down in the county taxes. So your counties and you're not alone. In Connecticut, most of the New England places, the counties don't have a high millage rate. And you can see that in the tax bill. The county's bill is about $800. The city's is about 14,000. So which is good because you actually have a lot more revenue to work with the cost of your city. So here's the state in total value, and you can see the big parcels up 93, very, very valuable, but they're huge parcels of land. Value per acre, some of those are actually non-taxable like White Mountain, but they showed up in value for some reason, but they're non-taxable. And also you'll notice these black splotches around the map. Those are where there's just missing data, where the parcels don't show up in the geographic map, but they are paying taxes, and the data is there. They're mostly just rural. They're probably mostly just woods, to be honest with you, like up in the northern tier. But anyhow, here's your model, and you can see the different downtowns all around the model, and these are the focus cities. So we're going to focus on the southern tier, down in Nashua, Hudson, Pelham area. And we'll come back into that in a second. At a state level, taxable and non-taxable, you're looking at about 20% non-taxable across the state at the state level. And you can see a big chunk of that is in the center of the state in your mountains, which is reasonable. These are the different districts. We did the Upper Valley this morning. We're down in the southern tier today. We did Seacoast, I believe that was last week, but we have 2 more in the Southwest region in Central Corridor. So if you want to see those studies, those are still going to happen. And these are all the different towns and cities that we did the analysis for. So you'll have those as a sample set. We'll be going through these, and so you can see more specifically your communities, but you'll be able to see the same amount of information for all of the others in the study set. So onto the southern tier. We did Manchester last year. So we do have that study, and that's a deeper singular city study. And I'll show some of that data in this presentation, but mostly this is a focus on the Nashua, Hudson, Pelham area. So starting with Nashua, the prime community in the region. Here's your total value of Nashua. Here's your value per acre. So going from this, you can see these larger parcels, particularly down by the Massachusetts border, very valuable in total value, but per acre, not so much. Here it is in 3D. So you can see your downtown actually does pop up quite well. I mean, these malls are expensive, but from a productivity standpoint, you can see how much the stuff around it isn't really worth that much. It's about residential in value. Countywide, you can see yourself next to Manchester, and then your little cousin of Peterborough further out, and you can see it's downtown. At a county level, your county is about 10% of the state's area. It's about 25% of the state's value. That's a 1 to 2.5 ratio of productivity. That's actually pretty good for a county in value, but you do have some pretty powerful cities in your county from a value standpoint. Nashua, inside the county, is about 3% of the county's area. It's about 18% of the county's value. That's a 1 to 6 ratio of productivity for your city to your county. And again, you've got a lot of value spread out in Nashua. Your downtown is a ratio of productivity to your city is about 0.7% of the city's land area. It's about 2.5% of the city's value. That's a 1 to 4 ratio of productivity. That's actually on the low side. An average downtown in our experience is usually around a 1 to 6. So this tells me that you grew up the outside of the downtown faster than you grew up the inside of your downtown. Your downtown should have been growing at the same rate your suburbs were growing to maintain that value. And that's probably the story y'all probably already know. But really that should be, you should work toward getting that up to 1 to 6. Now your downtown as a ratio in the county is 0.02% of area and about, let's call it 0.5 of value. That's a 1 to 24 ratio. So your downtown is actually really good for Hillsborough County. So that's something to be proud of. So what's good for downtown, we find, what's good for Main Street is great for the city, but it's usually unbelievable for the county because the county doesn't have to provide services to Main Street, but it gets wealth from it. Taxable, non-taxable, Hillsborough is pulling about 20% non-taxable, which is about average statewide. Inside your city, about the same, about 20% non-taxable. And a lot of that's, parks that and the airstrip. Land use types. So these are the ingredients that make up a city. So think of the buildings are the commodities. So you have single family coming in at about $500,000 of value per acre for a single family detached house. Multifamily is about 3 times that in Nashua, coming in at about 1.7 million of value per acre. Commercial is under multifamily. So multifamily is more productive than commercial, and the commercial boxes. Your mixed use is coming in at 10 and peaking out at about 13 million for something like a modest 3-story box, basically. So this is, again, stacking your stories, you're stacking your value, highly productive. It comes with a different level of management, though, because you probably have to think of parking differently than you would in the commercial strip. This is just seeing those same commodities on a map. But basically, this image and this image they're basically the same thing. One's the GIS map of productivity, and one is just a map, the way that we typically see it. So we've done both of these for every community. Some people like maps, some people like the GIS model, so you got both. At a productivity level, taking the whole city and dropping it on its side and looking north, I guess this would be like if you're floating in Massachusetts looking northward, this is what you'd look like. This is your average value citywide at about $500,000. Your single families a little bit above that. Your commercial is a little above that. Here's your multifamily, your mixed use, and your peak. So think of this like your different tide marks. Dipping over to the Manchester model and bringing that in and just looking at the whole county, here's Nashua. There you are, and you can see how relatively small your downtown looks compared to Manchester's potency. You're peaking out at 13 million of value per acre. Manchester is pulling a high mark of 68 million per acre. And what's kind of, it's like, you don't even have to think, just ignore the tallest building in downtown Manchester, which is the big spike. Look at their middle ground is so much more potent than what you've got. And they're not that much more in population. Also, when you zoom out and you bring Peterborough into it, they're only 6,000 people, and their peak of their model at 12 million an acre is pulling almost what you guys are pulling, and you're how many more times population than them? I mean, that's kind of stunning. So think about that. Think about the choices that are made and how you develop and what kind of wealth you're yielding in the pattern. So when we did this for Manchester, Manchester's got a little bit more non-taxable than you do, yet their average value per acre is a lot more than yours, about $60,000 an acre more. But it's where their peak value is at 67 million versus your 13. And once you remove the peak and just come down to their number 2, that's even doubling your peak. And again, they're not much more population. So think about that. There's opportunity, obviously, to cultivate wealth and work on your downtown because you have the population base to do that. Stepping down into Hudson now, same deal where we're gonna grab the biggest property, and the jungle comes in as one of the most valuable properties in total value, but value per acre, it's not much because it's a golf course and it's pretty flat. So you can see a cluster of value on the west side here, and then another little knuckle over here. But for the most part, this is it's like a fried egg with the egg yolk on one side of the egg white. In the county scheme, there it is on the side, as you all know, on the side of Nashua. Is a city in the county. It's about 3% of the area, 6% of the value. It's a 1-to-2 ratio for the county. And again, you don't have to remember these numbers. We'll have this all in a chart for you all at the end. The downtown to the city is 0.2 in area. It's coming at 0.8 in value, which is a 1-to-4, very similar to Nashua. But remember, 1-to-6 is the average. So there's room for improvement there with the downtown. The downtown, which you can't even see in the model, Kate promises me that Kate is our analyst on the project. She promises me that it's there. Anyway, so that's its area to value, which is a 1-to-8 ratio of productivity, which is reasonable for a small community in the county. Your area of non-taxable is in Hudson's about 13%, which is a little bit below average. So that could be worked up, if you will. And your land uses. So here's your single family at $500,000 per acre. Multifamily is coming in more than 3 times that at 1.8. Commercial is somewhere between the two. Let's call it 600,000. You don't have mixed use ones that we can average out here in your community. So that's again, why is that not happening? How do you make that happen? But this is your peak right here at 3 million, which given your population, you could be doing better than this at 3 million in peak. Again, remember, Peterborough is pulling 12 million of value per acre in its downtown, and they're only 6,000 people. So here you are on a map and where those properties are located. Here's the productivity model or the side view looking northward, and here are your different title marks. Here's your city average, your single family average, your commercial average, your multifamily average. So multifamily is actually pretty strong from a valuation standpoint in Hudson. You're missing your mixed use, and here's your peak. On to Pelham. The Hannafords shows up as a very valuable property in total value. One of the things that was kind of interesting is what's going on in the lake. This property is showing up green in total value, but in value per acre, you see all of the heat shift toward the lakefront properties, which is obvious. You'd have a lakefront property is going to be worth something, but you'll notice it's not deep. It's hugging the edge, and you don't get much more value around that because those properties don't have a lake view. So there's a very limited amount of value that you can pull out of lake real estate, and it's usually hugging the edge. But in the 3D model, you can see how that pops up. But that's more of an illusion of wealth. It's going to be limited to just those properties. Whereas in mixed use developments, you're basically creating that value by creating place. So for Pelham is a part of the county. It's about 3% of the area, 4% of the value. That's a little bit more than a 1-to-1 ratio of productivity. It's not that strong at a county level. What we kind of assembled as a core of your downtown, or what could be a downtown, is 0.4% of the area, 0.8% of the value. That's pulling a 1 to 2. Again, remember 1 to 6 should be your goal, and maybe that's something that you shoot for with public policy or incentives, or trying to expedite getting projects to happen there. You have that opportunity because you have the population. It's just how do you plan for that to get that in place and make that happen? The other thing is, what can you learn from other communities and sort of replicate is policy. But there's the downtown in the county of Pelham. 1/100th of a percent of area, 3/100ths of value. So it's a 1 to 3 ratio of productivity for the downtown to the county. Non-taxable, you're at about 15% non-taxable, again, a little bit below average. And it's sort of, are there opportunities to stitch some of this together with greenways or whatever? How can you capitalize on this? Land use patterns. So these are the different commodities in Pelham. There's your single family, your multifamily, your commercial at $500,000. Well, about 500,000, just a bit above multifamily. So you see a flip here where commercial's more. Again, missing mixed use in your peak value at 3.6 million over by the lake. And here they are in plan. And then for Pelham's title marks, it's a fairly flat model. Here's your average, your single family, your multifamily at a little under 500,000, commercial coming in at 500,000, a nudge above. You're missing mixed use, and here's your peak at 3.6 million. So I'm going to go through a series of comparisons now. We have these bar charts of the whole sample set. I find these difficult to present in PowerPoint. They're also a lot of information to take in on a slide. So I prefer to have these as a printout or a PDF or something like that, so you can really study them. But basically, we threw together a lot of different questions. What's your population? How do you rank from that? How do you rank from an area standpoint of total acres? So you'll have all of this, but really it's like what the key things to focus on are maybe density, which is how many people do you have per acre or something like that. And you can see here's where you all stack up. Nashua is actually incredibly dense from a people per acre standpoint, less than Manchester. It was also interesting to see Portsmouth and how dense Portsmouth is, well above Hudson and Pelham. I was kind of surprised by that, but something you probably already know, that they are dense. But you can see that Hudson's not much more, or it's even with Laconia, and almost as dense as Exeter. And here's the population clusters, let's say. So maybe this is something that you all could do is look at yourself within these clusters and pools, and see your city as these are your likely pairings. For Dover, Rochester, Concord, I mean, there's still a big step to get to Nashua and Manchester, but basically this is a peer group. Portsmouth, Keene, Hudson, you can look at their very similar populations. And Pelham, you're in the Laconia, Exeter, Lebanon group of population. So it is a pretty big step to get into the 20s, and then again going into the city scale of over 50. From a taxable, non-taxable standpoint, we made this chart, which is a valuation of non-taxable, but what's probably more important is to look at your portfolio in aggregate. So how much of your area is in non-taxable? You can see the average is 19%. Those that have more than average, Concord, which you'd expect, they're a state capital, so they're gonna have the state buildings and stuff like that. Exeter has not only Phillips Academy, but it's got a lot of green preserves and stuff that bring down their taxable real estate. But Berlin is by far the outlier. Now, in Berlin, one of the things that's not fair is that, you know, inside the city limits, Berlin's got the Jericho Park, which consumes a lot of area. So once you take out the Jericho Park, they're really about average from a non-taxable standpoint. From a total value standpoint, as a municipal officer or as a public official, this is your community as a portfolio. So Nashua, you're worth $8 billion as a taxable value. So you're an $8 billion corporation. Hudson, you're about 2.6 billion. You're pretty close to Rochester and just below Hanover. And then Pelham, you're kind of equal to Exeter and somewhere between Exeter and Laconia as a total valuation. So again, those might be another peer set sample to see what they're doing. How are they hitting in their peaks versus your peak value per acre or average value per acre? So let's see, let's go Pelham and Laconia. Here's Pelham, this is your average value per acre at 121. Laconia's got $50,000 an acre more than you in average productivity. So what are they doing that's giving them that strength? They're the same population, right? And then Nashua, Portsmouth comes in higher than y'all on an average value per acre. And let's see, and here's Hudson here beneath Laconia. So Laconia, with the population of Pelham, is more than Hudson in value. Now, from a ratio standpoint of your downtown potency of area, you can see that the three of y'all are at the end of the spectrum that have a low productivity in your downtown. Manchester as well. And what we've realized in Manchester, a lot of that's the quantity of surface parking that they have in their downtown. So even though they have some buildings that are very potent, they've got a lot of area that's of low value that drags down their potency. So they should be a 1 to 6 as well. So generally, you want to be a little bit more than Laconia as your base downtown value. And then Hanover is just doing amazing. It's an outlier. But Berlin's not doing so bad for their downtown. And again, that's because of the density of buildings. Even though they're a low wealth community, I mean, they don't have the activity that, let's say, you experience on the southern tier. They have a highly potent downtown, but Peterborough does too, at a 32-to-1 ratio of productivity. So from a density to value to acre standpoint, Portsmouth has a high value per acre. Compared to Nashua, is about neck and neck. But when you go over here and you look at Nashua, you're actually way more dense than Portland. Portland's like a third the density, and they're actually, or Portsmouth, sorry, is a third the density and actually more valuable. And then when you get over here to Hudson and Pelham, y'all are in the middle of the pack on your value per acre. And you look at your density, you know, here's Pelham and Hudson in your density, your city people per acre density. So taking this model, this image that we had that I showed you earlier, and doing the whole 15 community mashup of your data. This is how it looks. For your single family across the whole sample set is about $600,000 of value per acre. Here's your commercial at about $1 million, and y'all are pretty even in this. Here's the multifamily. Your multifamily is a little lower than that, and then here's mixed use, which 2 of your communities don't have, but Nashua does at 8 million, and then peaking out at 16 million. For putting the peers side by side, we have a series of these that we'll share with you, but basically this is looking at the 3 of you side by side and just giving you some data points. So here's your populations, and as you know, they're wildly different populations. Your average value per acre, again, high to low, with Nashua at the highest, in Hudson and Pelham in the hundreds of thousands. The ratio of downtown to city at 1:4, 1:4, and 1:2, and your peak value per acres, again, not that high, but Nashua should be a lot higher than that, and there's opportunity for Hudson and Pelham to grow up a downtown. Comparing peer groups, actually, let's kind of skip this one. It's a different, I should have pulled this slide. Here's, looking at Hudson, Pelham, and Laconia. Laconia also is sort of, you can see they're sort of nascent downtown here, but basically all 3 of these communities has the opportunity to build that place. It's not for everybody, but it's a portion of your market will enjoy that, and it also adds a different diversity of building investment. But you can see that Laconia actually is pulling a quicker or a higher peak value per acre, even though they're in the ballpark of population and in the ballpark of average value per acre. So that's maybe a model to learn from in Pelham, but also learn from those communities that actually do have the downtowns that are very similar in population. And you can see the downtowns, even Claremont, which is not that strong of a downtown, is pulling a peak of 2.6 with an average of 28,000. So their downtown, or their average value, is 1/5 what y'all are pulling in average value, but they're pulling a stronger peak to average ratio difference than what you all are. Lebanon, it's only 13,000. They actually have 2 different peaks going on, but their main peak is at 14 million. And again, Peterborough, which is within your county, pulling 12 million of value per acre. So that to me is really strong. And then, Lebanon pulling an average of 90,000. Now, granted, that's the spillover effect of Hanover, but that's definitely a lesson you can learn because they basically have a tighter cluster in their development to get that average up. Nashua, again, learning from your peers, you can see the downtown of Concord, even though they're half your population, and a much lower average value in Concord. They're pulling a significantly higher value per acre to peak than you all are at $46 million of value per acre for their peak versus y'all at 13 million. So just to close with some lessons, lesson of the historic architecture is incredibly important. And you all know this. One of my favorite stories of historic architecture is Charleston, which is the southern version of Boston, basically. And we did their model, and I joked with them. I said, look, you didn't make the ocean, so we're going to wipe that out. This is what humans made. And we grabbed all the buildings that predate the Declaration of Independence. So this is the old, we have a birth date of our country. So we grabbed all the colonial buildings. This is the oldest liquor store in the entire country. It's called the Red Dot Liquor Store. Built in 1686. This is a revolutionary getting his drink on. But just grabbing all the colonial buildings, and this is not hard to do. These are just little, what is that, 14 feet, 2-story building by about, 20 feet long. Little buildings are incredibly productive, and here they all are. There they are in plan. So these buildings, 21 acres of those buildings were built before our country was created, and they kicked out $600,000 in county taxes in 2015. They paid city taxes on top of that and a downtown improvement district on top of that. But this is what the county got. Out in the county is this Walmart, which is also 21 acres, so same area, and this is what it paid in this same year, $47,000. So these buildings for 240 years have produced 13 times the productivity. And that Walmart, remember, this is born in 2005. It's going to be gone in 2030. So what kind of value are you creating? And this is, again, the lesson that we see in New Hampshire. in spades across your property. And you can see that many of these are old buildings, but this one here in Hanover, that's a new building, mimicking the older architecture and producing that value. Again, these are opportunities to create value. And there's also design decisions that happen on a common basis, and it's really design affects value. So I'll give you an example. One of our colleagues is doing a project in Derry. It's in the city, and so here's Derry. This is its boundary. The downtown is kind of right here under the word Derry, and the project that we're talking about is kind of at the periphery of the growth area of Derry. And then here's another look at a zoom in. So there's the site that Jeff Speck is working on, and there's a project going on across the street. So the developer asked us to analyze it and see what's going on with these three properties. You can see the sprawl that's already happening in the area with these kind of looks like, like a train wreck of apartments. They're just kind of thrown around with all their commensurate parking lots around and not really stitched into the fabric of the community. It's just kind of connected umbilically on the main road. But this is an opportunity to repair that situation. So Jeff is working on site number 1. This is Jeff, author of these 2 books. This is his site, and there's a project going on across the street. So Jeff's working here, and he basically designed sort of like a New Englandy village kind of thing with a little through street that connects through, and all of the parking kind of tucked behind the buildings. But it's got this pedestrian street feel that's kind of typical of visiting a village that's been built up. And you can see the street network down here below. So when I look at this stuff as an urban designer, I sort of put on some x-rays to do some analysis, but here's the site across the street. So these are 2 conceptual drawings. So how would you evaluate them? So these are going through the evaluation process. And what I would recommend, or actually what I did recommend to them, is to just do an analysis of the building and the parking to see this is what Jeff's done on one side of the street with buildings and parking, and this is the other side of the street. So just with this one view, you can see what's going on and how different they are. These aren't the same kind of product. So Jeff has taken the care to sculpt the street through the site and shape the street as a pedestrian environment, but cars go through that and they find their parking behind the buildings. Conversely, this is a traditional suburban pattern where you have this kind of field of parking with bars of buildings just kind of like thrown onto the site. It's going to have a commensurate different feel on the street. It's going to step back from the street on one side versus Jeff holding the street on the other, and it's going to be as loose going through there as well. But there's data to support this. So if you look at the data, really the thing to focus on is the building to parking ratio. On this side of the street, it's about a 1-to-1, maybe a 1.5 ratio of productivity. When you get over here, it's close to a 1-to-3, so double the parking. And it may seem like a good thing. Let's have more parking. It's like, well, actually, what's the financial consequences? And this is again what we saw in Manchester, is that people ask for parking all the time, but there's a financial consequence to it. So here's Manchester's. Remember I said that Manchester's downtown wasn't that potent for what it should be. It should be a 1-to-6. This is all the parking in and around downtown Manchester. And one of the comments that we heard is that there's not enough parking near the old lofts or the old mills by the river. And if you look at that, that's a 5-minute walk from center to edge. There is a lot of parking within a 5-minute walk, and all of those white arrows are pointing to structured parking. So it's not that they have a parking problem, they have a perception problem. But financially, this is the whole city as a boundary, as a square. That's the footprint of all the parking together. This is all the buildings. Here's the roads. This is a liability. You have to pay for the roads, and that money's coming out of this stuff. All of this backyards, buffers, berms, that stuff doesn't pay money. And here's the numbers for Manchester. The average Manchester resident, there she is. She's got about 1,000 square feet of buildings and about 600 square feet of parking dedicated to her across the city. Now that's going to have a value, and in Manchester's case, it's $90 a square foot is the average building value. This is the best parking spot in the entire downtown. In Pearl Street, that's pulling an average value of $1.20. Once you go further out, the value drops. But we'll just use the highest one. Now, when you build a street, that street's going to cost you $20 a square foot, and ongoing maintenance, replacement, rehabilitation, whatever. It's going to cost that much in front of the building. It's going to cost that much in front of the parking. So let's do some simple math here. If you're paying 2% of taxes on $90 and 2% of taxes on $1.20, this is paying 75, the $90 is paying 75 times more taxes than that, yet your cost is the same. That's a subsidy. So we have discounted the cost of parking, even though our cost is the same. That's a subsidy. So make sure you're writing that down and that your community is conscious to it. So when we go back to this site and see that, oh yeah, this has got a lot of parking, Joe, this is super awesome. It's like, yeah, the value on this side of the street is about $5 million an acre. The value on that side of the street is about 2.5 million. So you basically get half the taxes off that because you're getting half the value on a per acre basis. So as you're having this conversation conceptually about the design, these numbers need to be present so we're aware of the design decisions that we make on a project by project basis. And oftentimes you may say, well, Joe, it's just this one parcel. It's like, yeah, go ahead and add that up on all the decisions that you've made over the last 20 years. And every single time you do this, I can eat pizza, once a month. I'm not going to eat it every single day, even though I'd like to. It would kill me. The same is true of parking. So just write that down. And the community needs to understand the consequences of what they ask for. So put that down. Also understand the carrying cost of the roads. I mentioned that earlier. And I'll give you a simple example of that. This is Lancaster, California, which is up and over the mountain from Los Angeles. It's a community of 160,000 people. They don't have a great downtown. They have a couple buildings that are over 2 stories tall, and you can see them in the model. But what was crazy is how much roads they have. They're carrying about 953 miles of roads. And it's kind of funny. I don't know what 953 miles looks like. So we put it on a map and showed them. They have enough roads to pave a road from Los Angeles to Portland. Now, when roads come into your portfolio, when I as a developer give you a road, you have to rebuild that every 50 years. So we showed them, we're like, look, here's when your roads were built. Your great grandparents went on a little road building spree in the early 1900s, and everybody went to sleep until the 1950s. And you can see in 1953 how many lane miles you put down in that one year. That's pretty crazy. Well, guess what? That comes back to haunt your parents' generation with the first rebuild in 1983. Now, when your parents were hit with that capital expense, what did they do? They let out more development, they annexed more land. Well, you got more roads with that. So this comes back with a second rebuild, and it brings along with it the new stuff. So we just stopped them in 2016 and said, you're not going to build another road from here to infinity. Let's just see what your carrying cost of your build rebuild cycle looks like for your streets. And this is what it looks like. So your first wave, no one planned that out. Every American city just went ahead and just suburbanized. And you did this in New England as well. We just added more infrastructure to our communities in the 1950s and 60s. And then guess what? We had to rebuild that in the 1980s, which is tremendously expensive. But we told ourselves, this is who we are. We're not the horse-drawn carriage people anymore. We don't walk, we drive. It's like, all right, well, now it's getting worse and worse. Our generation and the next generation is going to be dealing with this, and we can't afford it, period. Our current tax system won't carry it. In fact, we flushed Lancaster's money into the roads and showed them where they ran out of roads. They ran out of roads where the red stuff hits. Now that's a choice. You can unplug those roads. You can give them back to the community. You could just stop maintaining them. There's lots of choices you can make, but you can't pay for the roads that you have. So back to New England. Here's Manchester. Here's the city that they had in the 1920s with that population. They had 77,000 people on 140 miles of road by 1925. That's about 9.6 feet of road per person. So let's call it 10. They added a lot more people since 1925. They added 111,000 people, but they also added 500 miles of road. So 5 times the amount of roads for more than double the people to get it up to 25 miles of road, or 25 feet of road per person. Remember, it was 10 feet for 1925. Were those people mutants that they were like dying in the street? They just didn't have enough infrastructure, but they grew their population 44%. They grew their infrastructure 163%. This is not a recipe for success. This is a painful lesson in how we've grown our communities over the last half century. And we have to acknowledge that. So now what? I'm not going to just get depressing and scold you about roads. There are solutions. Do more analytics. Take this as maybe the first wave of analytics. Dig deeper. This is a map that we did in Cheyenne, Wyoming of just the dirt value per acre. There are no buildings in this image. So what we did for you all was a total valuation model. This is just the dirt value. And you can see up here on the upper left, this whole neighborhood, everybody in this neighborhood is blue. So you can see that everybody's the same value. That seems fair. Over on this side of the model, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but you can see how different everybody is on these two streets right here. Well, that doesn't seem fair. That's probably human error. But right here, where this parcel is all blue, I was presenting this in Cheyenne and I said, hey, why is this one blue at 15,000 an acre, and when you cross the street, it doubles to 45, same zoning category? And the tax assessor raised her hand and she just belted out. She goes, you don't understand. I'm like, what am I missing? She goes, well, they have more land over here. The more land you have, the lower the value. Let that wash over you for a second. The more land you have, the lower the value. Now the mayor started laughing so hard he almost spat coffee out of his nose. I'm like, really? I get more of your commodity, you give me a discount. She goes, well, that's our standard. I said, I've got 3 miles of street around this property. This fellow's got 200 feet. She goes, we don't count infrastructure as part of the valuation. That's not how our standard works. So the reason why I was at the assessors conference was to ask them where this came from. And their magazine is called Fair and Equitable. And I asked them, how is this fair? And how is it equitable? And to their credit, they're like, it's not. I'm like, where did this standard come from? Did Moses deliver this to you? By the way, they thought this was funny. Where do these rules come from? These standards, these policies, and how is that going to affect the market? Is it going to be fair if I have the ability to buy bigger pieces of land that you give me a discount? Who's going to be able to buy bigger pieces of land? Those that have more wealth. How is that fair? So those that can only afford smaller parcels are paying more per unit. That doesn't seem fair. And they're like, yeah, you're right. You should talk to Larry. So I'm seriously not making this up. I talked to Larry Clark, who's the head of research for the assessors organization. He's like, yeah, we probably need to change that. So just be aware that go into this with your eyes wide open, knowing that you're going to get different data, and have a conversation about it. Here's your county with your value per acre. And you can see it down here in Nashua, all of the out parcels down by the mall are actually more valuable than the malls behind it. So the malls are getting a break. But when you drill into this, you want to look for things like this, where why is this one neighborhood's dirt so much more valuable than everything else around it? What's going on with this guy right here? Why is that person's dirt so much more valuable than everybody else around it? So again, this is just using information to do a visual and then ask questions. And if the policy's not right, change it. Definitely learn from your neighbors. You've got a whole sample set of 15 cities that you can share from and learn from. Put yourself next to each other and see what's going on and who's doing something that you want to steal. I would definitely steal from Hanover. They got a really potent downtown. But also understand that all of this stuff. This isn't new for y'all. If I were showing this in California or Arizona or even here in North Carolina, it's freaky for people. But this is your history. This is a postcard of Portsmouth in 1905, and these buildings are pulling $30 and $40 million of value per acre, and they've been doing so for over 100 years. And they're applying that in Portsmouth. This is a building that's 30 million an acre, and they just went ahead and replicated it, just basically ripped it off on this new building right here. We didn't have the value when we were doing this, but they gave us, last week they told us this is pulling $70 million of value per acre. 70 on this little 4-story building right here, because it's highly potent. The other lesson about your architecture is, and you already do this, is it's make stuff that's adaptable. These buildings aren't in their original use. These buildings are designed in a way that they can be recycled and repurposed and reused for a century, where the modern box doesn't do that. Now, when you have a tax incentive that gives me a break for doing something cheaper, I'm going to do it. So don't fault the developers. Understand that's your property tax system at work, making cheap architecture, where your great-grandparents didn't behave that way because they would feel guilty. This was all local money. They weren't going to disinvest in their own community because they would be shamed. We don't operate that way. Now it's capital markets from New York City and Boston that are investing in our communities and extracting wealth out. You need to maintain your wealth and realize that parking is subsidized. Point number 5. I showed you this. I would make this a bumper sticker. Whenever anybody complains about parking, just say, okay, let's make sure we can subsidize more of it now, and make sure that your community is choosing that that's the best way to use your subsidy. Or is it better to build a park or a greenway or affordable housing or an art program? Make sure that you're making the choice conscious for your community so they can see the cost of it. And that leads to point 6, which is building for productivity. These buildings have such low value because they have such massive tracts of land with huge amounts of parking. And you can see that. Let's just look at Hanover versus Hudson right here. You know, commercial box, much smaller parking field, much higher value than what you got over here. So it may be convenient for you to just roll into a parking space in a big open space, but you're paying for it, whether you like it or not. These are pulling about less than $1 million of value per acre, where these commercial products are pulling 8 million value per acre. So again, realize the consequences of your decisions, and your patterns matter of your costs. When I talk about architecture and buildings, I'm talking about them like asset management. So you all are shareholders as asset managers of a municipality. So when we own in real estate, if I own this mall right here, I know that that mall has equipment that needs to be managed, like these air conditioners. These air conditioners need to be replaced every 15 to 20 years, and they're going to cost me $85,000 a pop for each one of them, and I have to plan to raise $35,000 for the crew and the helicopter to bring this stuff in. That is not cheap. So every 15 to 20 years, I need to squirrel away, somehow get $205,000 to keep my asset alive. So when you have a municipality, it's the same thing. These are your air conditioners right here. It costs you money to own those streets, yet you're going to get your revenue to pay for those streets out of those buildings. This would actually work where you have stacked money over your streets. This does not. You have a lot of costs for your streets with very little money. And I'll show you an example of that. Here are 88 houses in South Bend, Indiana, done in a grid and done in cul-de-sacs. And you may say, well, Joe, I like a cul-de-sac. I don't have traffic coming through my community. It's like, great, yeah, let's just measure this for a second. 88 houses, here are the roads, the pipes, the stormwater, and the total cost. So this is going to cost South Bend, Indiana, about $122,000 a year for reserve account and fixing these roads and pipes on an annual basis. Now, if you take 10% of their revenue, you're only getting 21,000. So 21,000 is a huge shortfall from 122. So that means you're losing $100,000 a year in just having these houses here. Residential single-family housing is subsidized in our tax system, period. That's the way our tax system operates. We've designed it so that our housing doesn't pay its full share. That's a fact. So if you take those same 88 houses and we run their numbers, you'll see that they are in a deficit as well. 78,000 or 79,000 versus 21. When you put them side by side, and remember, these are the same number of houses, it's a much larger subsidy on the cul-de-sac versus the residential. In fact, it's about 2 times the subsidy. So let me ask you a market question. If you're giving the market 2 times the subsidy, you'd be stupid not to take that, right? I mean, it's you're getting a bigger gift of your government in this versus this. So just be aware of that. The market forces are not influenced, are influenced by our tax system. That's a gift. And just as long as you're conscious about that and you're writing that down, great. Measure what you own. Do this for your streets. Know what your costs are and make sure that you're aware of what you're carrying. Every community should know this. You should know that at the top of your tongue. And consider your tax system. Just to close, this is a statewide model. Y'all should get together and think of different ways to run your finances, or at least talk with the state about giving you new tools. And I'll give you an example. One of my favorite questions is, well, if you're not going to tax on property, what would you tax on? Well, property tax is probably the most stable, but one of my favorite property tax models is called the land value tax, or the Henry George tax, which was pushed in the 1800s by this man, Henry George. And he was sort of a rock star in the tax world in the 1800s. And he had a whole following of people on land value taxes. And the basic premise is you tax on what you put into the ground in infrastructure so that it would stop land speculation. Because you can drive around your downtown in your community and you can find vacant lots. And you know what? If I'm not using that land for anything, I'm not taxed much for it. But that's a perverse incentive to waste your real estate. And they could just sit on it forever. Meanwhile, we're all paying the cost of the pipe, the car, the snowplow, all of that stuff. He thought that was wrong. Anyhow, there was a huge tax movement. Elizabeth Maggie Phillips was a Georgist. She has spectacular eyebrows. And she thought, you know what, I can't get adults to change their ways. I need to work with kids. So she invented a board game to teach us Henry George land value taxation. It's called Monopoly. Back then it was called Landlord's Game. But basically the lesson in her game is what? Land assembly, location, and if you put buildings on it, you win the game. She taught us how to understand cities better. So if there's one ask that I would have for your organization, for your group, for all of your municipalities, is get together and ask the state to at least allow the ability that if you wanted to choose a different form of taxation, that you could constitutionally be allowed to do that. Incidentally, your neighbors over in Vermont did that not too long ago. They got at least the enabling legislation through, so the communities have that opportunity. Give yourself more tools and give yourself the opportunity to think differently about your cash flow. And just to close, you know, we see this as a form of accounting. We just call it geo accounting because we're geographically putting on a map. All your costs are different. All of the revenues are different. Understand that geographically. Somebody living out at the end of 5 miles of road is more expensive to the community than somebody living 5 inches of road. So that's a direct relationship geographically. And like an accountant, you know, we're not here to judge. You know, your accountant will judge you if you can't afford a boat and you go buy one. You know, but if you can afford a boat, good, go for it. You know, that's your choice. So hopefully this all makes sense. We like to put these numbers on a map so you can see it. We recommend you can continue to do that so that the community understands value potency and you can see it writ large. I will recommend Strong Towns as an organization to follow, in particular Chuck's book. A lot of the principles that you see here are principles that we've learned from Chuck, particularly around the roads and costs. And with that, I'll close at my hour. I'm a little bit over. So thank you for your time, and we'll move on to questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe. That was great. A lot of valuable data in there for us to use. Folks in attendance, if you have questions, drop those in the chat. We'll try to get to as many as we can in the time we have left. I'm going to start with one that came in before we started the presentation. What advice do you have on how do New Hampshire's more rural sort of bedroom communities, now that you've analyzed Pelham and Hudson, how do they use this data moving forward? What advice would you have for those communities?
You know, I think for Pelham and Hudson, you know, and I don't mean this in a judgmental way, but it's mostly just a residential with some small commercial development. It's really not. It's hard to call it rural because you're talking, you know, 24,000 people. Let me give you a lesson, maybe that's transferable. Gwinnett County, Georgia. You know, lots of times is people, we can tell ourselves all day long who we think we are, but then there's data that says otherwise. You know, I can say I'm Brad Pitt. I can say that all day long that I'm Brad Pitt. Now you guys are getting information through these cameras to see that I am not Brad Pitt. So what I say I am and what I really am are two totally different things. But with cities, we hear this all the time. So Gwinnett County, which is outside of Atlanta, they told me that they're rural people. Lawrenceville is the county seat in Gwinnett County. I'd never heard of Lawrenceville. I'm only 4 hours away, but I kid you not, this is the South, and people do funky things down here. And one of the things that they told me is that I was not allowed to say 4 words in my presentation. These were like the dirty words in the community, and I wasn't allowed to use the word. Seriously, not during the presentation. I was not allowed to say the word urban, city, town, or municipal in the presentation because they're rural people. And these are bad words in their community. And I had to agree to this. You know, I'm just like, all right, it's your community. I won't use those words. I don't know what I'm going to say about my company. I guess we're just 3, but we'll roll with it. And here's Atlanta. This is the Beltway. But because they're outside of the Beltway, they said to themselves, we're not Atlanta. And here they are. Now, that county is 812,000 people. Like, that blew my mind. And I called up my client, who's the Chamber of Commerce. And I'm like, Kelly, y'all are 812,000 people. And she goes, yeah, but honey, look, we're 460 square miles. We're huge. We're just rural. And I was like, okay. We'll divide 820,000 people, or 812,000 people into 460 square miles. This is your density. Each of these people is 100 people. So you're 1,900 people per square mile, which is less dense than DeKalb, Georgia, which has Decatur and a piece of Atlanta in it. But as I was presenting to the community, we had all this other data, so I put it out there for them. And I said to them, I said, look, y'all are 200 people denser than Mecklenburg County, North Carolina. And I asked them, I said, what's in Mecklenburg? And somebody goes, Charlotte? And I'm like, yeah, I've heard of Charlotte. Like, they're actually less dense than you. They've built a Charlotte. What the hell did you do? I never heard of Lawrenceville. This is Nashville, Tennessee. You're 600 people denser than them. This is Austin, Texas. This is Raleigh. This is Asheville, where I live. And this is Chapel Hill, North Carolina. That's what rural looks like. What did you all do? And when we did their model, it was like the same thing. It was like Josh McCarty did this. I was like, Josh, turn it on its side. And you could see it's that same yellow and oranges ooze across the whole model. And it looks like a 1970s shag carpet. It's like the same thing across the model. And the reason why I was freaked out is this is what we typically saw. And here in this is Orange County, which is home to Chapel Hill, Carborough, and Hillsborough. I can see downtown, and this is some new urbanism right here. And it's not to say that everybody should live in an urban product. It's to say you have that opportunity. Why aren't you capturing it? And why did you do this? So this is a choice. Whatever you said you were doing, you created something. So this is the most potent building in their entire county. It was built by their great grandparents in 1920. I'm like, y'all haven't achieved anything better than that. That's it. This is your facts. So here it is. That's the most potent building in your entire county. All of these places are less dense than you, and they have more value. So we put the three counties side by side, and of Davidson, Travis County, and Gwinnett County. And we did an economic heart monitor to pulse them out. And I showed it to them. I said, look, they're peaking out at 192 million per acre. The less dense Travis County is peaking out at 476 million in Austin, and y'all are flatlining at 8. And they argued with me. They're like, well, but we're not urban. I'm like, I never brought that up. What I want you to know is you're dense. And I probably should have said pun intended, but it's like you're dense. You have all of the same horizontal infrastructure as these places. You have none of the vertical stuff to pay for it. So are you going broke yet? And they're like, oh yeah, we're broke. You can grow on a sugar high, and you can build all of that horizontal infrastructure, but sooner or later the piper comes due that you have to start fixing this stuff. And I think that's the problem with suburban expansion, is that it feels really good for that first 20 years. So if I were Pelham and Hudson and Nashua, I would look back in time, maybe go back 30 years and just look at what you were 30 years ago, look at where you are today, and see what you created during that 30-year window. And that's going to be your shape to come in the next 30 years of replacing that stuff. That's going to be a problem. But be aware that this is the reason why you're experiencing these issues. And there's nothing you could do about it now. You just have to work your way out of it. But you shouldn't repeat the mistake over and over and over again.
Right. We have
it's not a recipe.
A follow-up from someone in Pelham. So they said that they can't help but hear while you're talking, Pelham residents who prefer that they prefer the less dense value per acre because they feel it's their way to preserve their rural character, which is something that's very important to Pelham residents. So
Sure.
They do have a small mixed-use village district in their, what would be, I think, their downtown, that has one multi-use structure under construction, 2 more in the pipeline. There are only going to be some small spikes. And he said, so density scares the people of Pelham, even though it's key to creating more housing and more small business opportunities. So what sort of advice do you have? How would you respond to those assumptions from some of those residents who are afraid of that density?
Well, it's a couple of things. One is you're not telling them to move into it. This is 30%. What I told the Gwinnett County people, I said 30% of your market would choose that. That's not me saying it. That's the National Board of Realtors. 30% would make that choice. And for you to not provide that opportunity, they're going to go somewhere else. They're going to go up to Manchester. They're going to go to some other community. You've lost that opportunity for that transaction to get that revenue. Now, from a standpoint, just to be maybe a little bit, I don't want to be too mean, but there's one of my friends here in town. I was having breakfast with him, and he's like, you know what, Joe? I like to get out in the woods with my gun, and I like to run around in the woods with my gun, and I like to, that's what I do. It makes me happy. I'm out there in the woods with my gun. I'm like, Steve, you can do whatever you want. I don't care what you do on your property. The problem I have is that road that gets to your house. Like, I would pay to get on that road to go past your house to the same woods that you run around in your gun, but I shouldn't have to pay for your lifestyle. I shouldn't have to pay to subsidize your choices. So, and that's frankly what I'm doing, because you use that road every single day, maybe even twice a day. I use that road once a week. So why should you get all of that extra infrastructure and that subsidy that I don't enjoy? You're wasting my money. Now, to his credit, he just looked at me, he goes, yeah, it seems fair. So let's all be intellectually, and to Steve's credit, he was very intellectually honest. Once I put that out there for him and said, look, I'm going to challenge you on your fantasy lifestyle and just see the cost of it. So for the same thing for rural people, are you willing to pay the cost of that? But don't go and live with a suburban tax level in a environment that's costing you more than you're bringing your money in. That's not a recipe for success. You can tell yourself you like it. Well, hell yeah, you're not paying for it. Who wouldn't like that? So unless you're a logger or a mountaineer or a farmer, you really shouldn't be out in that spread out lifestyle, because it's super, super expensive. But we've sold ourselves this promise that we think we can afford it. But guess what? Math doesn't work out. So let's just be honest and either raise your taxes, change your tax system to a fee system so you're covering and recouping more of those costs, but the community shouldn't pay for that subsidy unless you actually vote to do that. So make it conscious. But really, let's all be adults and have a conversation about the cost of asphalt and plowing, and let's just be honest about it.
Great. I can't wait to have further conversations with our folks in Pelham about this sort of idea and this data. We have another question.
I'll put Steve in a pickup truck and send him north. I think you'll like him.
Yeah, we have another question from another attendee. How do you shift developers' motivations for large, more sprawl-oriented developments when federal tax policies often favor less dense or single-family construction?
Well, one is y'all can do impact fees. We can't do them in our state, and make them at least, pay some additional recapture the infrastructure. There will be an effect because it's going to also drive up the cost of housing for the new housing product that you desperately need from an affordability standpoint. So there's that trade-off. But the thing's simple. Let's go back to that number. At the end of the day, probably the most powerful point of information to use when you're talking to builders and developers, and it's one of the reasons why I always use these numbers. Let's see, where are you? Yeah. So if you look at this total value, and we'll take Hudson as an example. For folks inside Hudson, y'all should say, when you talk to builders and developers, like, I understand that your business needs to make money and you need to stay in business and you need to run your corporation, but so do we. We're a $2.6 billion corporation, and we shouldn't just be throwing our money all over the place in a subsidy. We have to maintain our corporation. And I would ask that you respect our ability to handle our own community, and make sure that we're not losing money. Just at a cold level, that's essentially what you're trying to do with your land use planning and your fiscal policies, your CAFR for your finance budget. But little old Hudson's $2.6 billion. So I'd like to see what home builder is even like a tenth of that in value. So it's like, you're a serious deal at 2.6 billion, and it's legitimate to say you want to count your money and understand your cash flow too.
I think we have time for one more question. So I'm going to ask you the question that you always get, which is about how do you sort of calculate the indirect value that you get from things like parks that don't themselves produce revenue for a municipality, but certainly add to the charm and the vibrancy and the character of a community?
Yeah, there's this came up in, I think, the general presentation. I'm not against parks. I live in a community that has a tremendous amount of parks, and I live here because of those parks, because I mountain bike, and I hike and do all of that. So those parks add value in my community. I just stay out of them. You know, I only go into them to recreate. I don't put my house there because that's where you start to get into problems. So I think that's the trade-off that we make in Asheville, is for a denser environment so we can all have those other spaces. And it just makes for a better quality of environment for that habitat. So you want to think of the bear and the rabbits and they need their own geoform. You can't chop that up because they don't operate that way. They need their own habitat. So I would start with the habitat, map it, and say, this is sacrosanct. This is our aquifer. These trees need to communicate with each other in a certain way. We have the biology and data to support that. That should be at the highest level of value in your community. There's a great book by Ian McHarg that came out in 1969 called Design with Nature, in which he taught us how to do this. My favorite quote of his in the book is, "The man on the moon will know the price of a gallon of oxygen," right? So if you don't have oxygen, how much would you pay for it? If you don't have parks, how much would you pay to get those done? So it's better to do them before the development gets out there, because taking a house out to make a park happen is super expensive. Buying it now and taking it off the market is incredibly valuable. And the value doesn't disappear. It shifts to the other real estate because people will pay more to have access to that amenity. So you saw the value of the dirt next to the ocean, right? So it's like, yeah, that's the value of the ocean's value doesn't disappear, does it? No, it just slides right to the beach. The same happens with parks. That you get that value is exchanged. Actually, you know what? Let me show you one thing. I have an image. Minneapolis, Minnesota. This is their dirt value per acre. So again, no buildings here. You can see downtown Minneapolis over here to the right. And then this little village right here is Wayzata. And I was kind of blown away. I was like, wow, Wayzata is really killing it at the edge of this lake right here. It's not a big place. It's about, I want to say 20,000 people. But I was showing this to the planner in Minneapolis, and I was like, hey, why is this downtown Wayzata popping up like Minneapolis? And he totally blew past that and goes, oh my God, you showed the ordinance 1986-2273, blah, blah. I'm like, what are you talking about? And apparently, it's Minnesota. They got a lot of lakes. There used to be a county law that you couldn't build next to a lake. All lakes had to be public accessible because they're Swedish and Norwegian people. They're very socially minded, and they thought that amenities should be part of the broader community good. Until 1986, when the Home Builders Association lobbied to privatize the edge of the lakes, and they got the policy changed. So you can see here, the crust value around the lakes only goes to those properties that are adjacent to the lake. It stops after that. There's no value transfer to any other property behind it. Yet when you go over here to the 1920s neighborhood that was created outside of downtown Minneapolis, both of these lakes are publicly accessible. There's a big community park here. There's a cemetery. There's a greenway that goes around both of these lakes like a big figure eight. And these neighborhoods all have access to these lakes, and hence all of the value of those lakes doesn't disappear. It goes into the neighborhoods. Again, this is just dirt, whereas the value of the dirt adjacent to the lake is only at the edge. So that's a conscious choice by design on how you use an amenity and how you can design a park to actually gain value. And in your downtown, should you have parks? Yes, but they shouldn't just be huge forests in the middle of your downtown. Like, that's a different kind of park. You need maybe a common or a little square or something, but out at the edge of town, that's where your forest should be. And far too often, some people get really excited about open space. They're like, put trees everywhere. It's like, well, no, we need to get density is what works for our community, how we walk around and make things happen. And you all know that in New England.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We're all out of time, but thank you so much, Joe. For all of our folks who are still on the call, we'll be sending out a follow-up email tomorrow with links to the video recording of this webinar. Please share it with folks in your community, share it with the members of your planning board, with your council or your select board member, share it with those people so that they understand this data. We'll also send links to the presentation itself and an email survey. We really appreciate if you can fill that out. And then a schedule for the upcoming local webinar. So we still have, I believe, the Southwest region left. There might be another one too.
The Central Corridor, the
the Concord area.
Concord
and you can find
up to
information
Berlin.
about, okay. You can find information about all of those on New Hampshire Housing's website. It's nhhfa.org/events. All right, thank you all so much for attending this presentation.
Thank you.